In the last story, I ended with arriving to Vladivostok, hitchhiking and trains, cargo trains and passenger trains, hiding there not to get caught and thrown out from time to time because of no ticket. But when I listened to my story, which I told arriving to Vladivostok, I started to recall different happenings which I didn't tell, and I didn't make any notes, and I think in future I will have to make some notes and think through the story. But the problem with notes is then it doesn't come very natural. So I try to do once again without making any notes, just from memory. And if there are some stories about which I missed during my storytelling, which would be interesting to know. Especially I thought about encounters with criminals in Russia. There are quite a few stories which I would like to tell in detail. Then I will make a different podcast, different story, specifically about my encounters with different gangs and criminals in Russia during my travels. But this story I will tell now as it comes, how I arrived back to my country. One more thing, I forgot to mention that actually when I was about 16 or 17, I made another attempt before going to Russia. I didn't have passport yet, and I tried to go in my country in a port to African ship. I didn't make any previous research which kind of ships were where or where we were going. I didn't even know the ship I was going on, where exactly it was going. But it sounded like African named ship, and it was definitely not a Russian ship, so not Soviet ship. So the ship's name was Monrovia, but I discovered that only later when I arrived already in port. I just wanted to go on some cargo ship going abroad anywhere. And I will tell this story separately because this was before I went to Russia. I was arrested when I didn't get very far. I was arrested when I was almost on the ship. But yes, it will be interesting to tell. And I made some mistakes as well in my previous story about, I said in 1993 probably was my first trip to Russia, but then I thought actually it was wrong, because in early 90s I already went to Russian army, and my big trip up to Vladivostok was before the army, before I served in the Russian army. So that I'm telling this because there may become some mistakes in dates and maybe even locations a little bit, because it was all over 30 years ago, you can imagine. And I haven't told many times these stories. I told just a little bit to my friends and people who just were interested where I have been. I told like where I have been, but I haven't never told anyone the entire story. So the point is, like, my memory hasn't been exercised to recall all this what happened so many years ago. Thus I will recall now, probably after telling the stories, many things which I forgot to mention. But the date was meant that not in 1993. I went to first big trip to Russia was in the late 80s, and second trip I did after the army. It was 1993, I think it was the second trip to Siberia. And later I did one shorter trip to Aral Sea, close to Aral Sea. I wanted to get to Tianshan, but for some reason I didn't feel good about that particular trip, so I turned back when I was already on Aral Sea, and I came back to my country. It was a very short trip, only I think 1 or 2 weeks something. And then later I went to Tianshan several times, 3 times. Once in I think in 95, when I trained in mountains for a month, and later in 97 I went for over a month, almost 2. And the same year I went again after half a year, just the same year, 97 I think it was, again to train. But first time I went early spring, and second trip same year was in summertime. And I already had friends there, and before going up to mountains I stayed at friend's place for a couple of days, and then I went to my training up to mountains. But yes, these are kind of memory corrections that basically first trip I did, I went to Vladivostok. It took me 3 weeks with little sideways movements, and I came back. It took me 2 weeks to come back to my country in northern part of Russia. As I mentioned, who haven't listened to my previous story, I don't mention my country for specific reasons, which you will understand later. But to tell you shortly that I just became politically active, and I escaped in late 90s after my last trip to Tianshan, and I came back. I became kind of involved in business. I was involved before, but I involved in business relation with government, and I became politically active against corruption. So last few years I had troubles in my country. Then I had to escape. That's why I'm not mentioning my country, because I haven't been in my country living for 20 years, just coming shortly to visit my children, and trying to see my children, and escaping again several times. That's why I'm not mentioning my country right now, maybe in the future. Anyway, that time when I was traveling Russia, I wasn't still politically active. I didn't know anything political. I was meditating, training in martial arts, and trying to get to Shaolin. In previous story I told that I already attempted twice, and for correction I told that I attempted twice to enter China from Manchuria, but that year I attempted only once, and second time from Blagoveshchensk, and the third time I tried to get to Japan to train there, because my attempt to get to China wasn't successful. So anyway, listen to my previous story, introduction, and now I continue from Vladivostok. I arrived to Vladivostok. And in Vladivostok, I wasn't very long. I was like 3, 4, or 5 days, something like that. And that was first time when I really felt like being homesick. That was first time. It was before the Russian army yet. In Russian army I also felt very homesick. But it was my first feeling of longing for home, and it really hurt, because it was very difficult trip, actually 3 weeks to get to Vladivostok without money, and I knew it takes a lot of struggle to come back, but I still decided I want to go to Japan. I wanted to overcome my emotions, my homesickness, And I went to a port, in cargo port, at night cover, and I don't remember how I knew that probably the name of a ship or something. I knew it's going to Japan. Most likely it was just the name of a ship. I don't remember that name of a ship. So a night cover, I found a hole in Russia. It's not very well kept. I found a hole or loose pieces on the fence, and the port is big, so it took kind of time to over the piles of wood and piles of all kind of materials in the port to get closer to a ship. But I knew that I saw people walking around even at nighttime there. I had to do it very carefully because it was considered already like foreigner zone of danger. I mean, it's Soviet time. It was very highly guarded, all kind of with incidents. I mean, that if somebody would go on a foreigner ship, especially, and regardless of that, it was still crappy, control and the fences, etc. So I succeeded to get in. I hid myself between big piles of logs, like wood logs, and right next to one big Japanese ship. And I saw that two options. One option was for cars, I don't know how it's called in names, for cars driving into the ship, it was open. It wasn't passenger ship, it was cargo ship. So all the trucks would drive into, and I was thinking, should I go just walking like a local worker into a ship and hiding inside there between cars somewhere, or whatever there was, I don't know, because there was no movement at the moment, just the door was still open. And I decided that it's too close to the control post. There was a control post where cars drove in, and I didn't know if somebody's sitting in the post, but it was all illuminated with projectors. So I decided I don't take such a high risk to go too close to a gate and walk in, and maybe some other workers inside, or some pastavoy. Pastavoy is like a guy who guards the ship. Maybe he's just inside the ship. So if I would walk in with straight face, I would maybe run into the control straight away. I didn't take the chance. I waited till nobody's around, because even nighttime there was no movement, but some few people, they were walking back and forth. And I found a moment. The second option for me was to climb on the rope. The other side of a ship, front side of a ship, was tied to a pier, and it was very large rope. I had to keep two hands over, like a tree. The rope. The ship was very big, and I decided I go by the rope up to ship and climb on there. And I took a chance. My backpack wasn't very heavy, but after climbing about 20 meters height, I think, something like that, I was completely tired, and the rope weight came over. It came through a hole which was round, and I couldn't grab anything on the there on the ship. It was impossible. I didn't have any option to climb on, and I was sitting on there, I think, like few minutes, and thinking, what's my next step will be. Should I just rest a little bit, hanging onto a rope, and try after a few minutes of rest again, just little by little, to actually I did try. Yeah, I rested a few minutes, and I started to pull me on, but the backpack, even if it wasn't too big, it was still heavy, because I had lot of conserved food in my backpack, because I didn't know how long the trip will be. I prepared myself. I told the last story, the Chinese gave me some money when I helped them on Chinese border back in Manchuria. So from this money I bought a lot of food, conserved food, and it was weighting me down. I wasn't able to get on the ship. So I decided, okay, I have to empty some of heavy weight from my bag. I'll go down, I'll eat some, and try again. So during my slipping down, when I was slipping back to a pier from the rope, there was just one trawler, I think it's called trawler boat, who pulls the big ships, was just passing by. Just bad luck, I would say, bad luck. I was slipping down, and when I was in the middle of a rope, the trawler boat passed by, and there was a few guys were there, and they watched me. They didn't say anything, they didn't stop, they passed by, but I was quite sure that they will tell someone, or either by radio or arriving where we were going. So, because obviously, if somebody is slipping down from a Japanese ship, it might be a spy. But I wasn't quite sure. Russia is a loose country. I was thinking, okay, maybe they don't do anything. So I slipped down to a pier. I hid again myself between the big logs. And I started to empty my backpack and started to eat a little bit. I had to take a rest and to prepare for next attempt. It was just the beginning of night still, maybe 2 o'clock at night. And then I saw a guy coming with a dog, walking on the pier. Maybe some 5-10 minutes later, after I hid myself. And I was thinking, now it's time to go, because dog could definitely find out where I am. And I started very quickly. I put everything back together into my backpack and started to slowly move away. But I was a little bit probably in rush, and I moved some of the logs, and it made some noise. And for my luck, the guy with the dog was still quite far. They didn't know exactly where the noise came from. So the guy let the dog go, and the dog ran first in my direction, but it ran past me on the pier, further away. So I was just lucky, and the guy, I don't remember, he didn't run probably. He calmly walked past me. I was hidden there, and he walked after the dog. And when I had the last chance, probably it was mine. So I, as quickly as I could and as silently I could, same time, I walked to the same hall where I came into the port and walked out. And I didn't try again. So that was an unsuccessful attempt. And when I walked around just a day or something in the Vladivostok, just looking around and thinking, should I go further on to north? I really, really wanted to go to Kolski Polostrov. It's a very beautiful area, and I would have gone then with very would have made very big round around by the land. And I knew that the roads are very bad and the climate is tough. I had homesickness at the same time, and then I thought maybe another time. I wasn't still so prepared to go to the wild, to Siberia. I didn't have any hunting guns or any special equipment to survive in Siberia, I mean in wild areas. because everywhere where I traveled, I traveled pretty close to civilization. I could anytime ask help. But going to Kamchatka, it would have been, I suspect, of my capacity, out of my possibilities. So I made decision to come back home. And then I jumped passenger trains mostly. I think, let me think. All the trip I came with passenger trains, but of course without money. So how we usually went to train? I tried to go to a train by scheduler which was going to my direction. One of the first persons, and or one of the very last. Why? Because very last, when the control is not standing on the door, not controlling the tickets. And if you're very first, I just tried to pick up the wagon, which is where there is no control standing outside, and try to slip in. And as soon as I went in, the going first was better always, because then I could hit on the third level of in coupe wagon. There are like several levels in coupe wagons. Sleeping wagons means coupe wagon. First bed, then above it is a second bed, and above that is a third, which is for bags. It's very narrow, but enough for big bags and big luggage. And under that is the shorter one. Under the bed is like shorter luggage storage, but I was tall enough I wouldn't fit there under the bed. I would have been in trouble to get out of there anyway when somebody's sitting on. So I hid myself on the top level where the luggage is usually, and I put my bag in front of me so I wouldn't be visible. And sometimes I think the passengers, they saw me, but I explained them that I just need to get home, and lost my passport, lost my money, and they didn't say anything to control. But sometimes I just found a moment when the Russian train stops, when I wasn't in Vladivostok, because Vladivostok is the last stop, it's close to the sea. But the long-haul trains, long-haul passenger trains, they make like several longer stops in bigger cities, and people go out sometimes. So in other cities, when to get on, people went out to eat, to buy from pier some food what locals were selling. So I choose the place where nobody is in the coupe at the same time, or even Platskart. Platskart is like without doors, the rooms, and tried to find a moment when nobody was around, because everybody was hungry. Russian usually went out quickly. Only few people were in wagon during longer stops. And when I hid myself between bags on top, and the next stop, when control were already going through all the tickets and didn't suspect anything, then I came out when nobody see, and sat there like a regular passenger with everybody. But sometimes, after some time, the control made another trip after several hours, sometime after the next day, because I traveled for days on the same train sometime. Then I got caught, and in some cases I explained that I lost my money and I lost my documents. I did have documents, but I told I lost, that I'm in trouble, and I think sometimes I even showed them the documents, so we wouldn't call militia, the police. And then sometimes they didn't want to know anything. They didn't want to take chances of their control. They had some supervisor controls as well sometimes. And I didn't have money to bribe them. They would have taken money. It was cases I also gave my things to control when I really was in some area later, like in Russian Middle East. I was in areas where I wouldn't want to go off a train because I would be in the middle of nowhere. And then I gave him just bribe with some things, which I didn't have much things, but I still had to give just to get to the next bigger city. But yeah, so I got on without money basically. And about the things, I actually, it was actually only once I think I gave my cell phone. It was already on cell phones. It was in 1997, I think. I bribed one. I told I give you. No, wrong. I didn't give my cell phone. I give my photo camera. Then I had already like photo camera with me, and I gave to the guy from when coming back from Chan that you will get this camera when I arrive safely to Moscow. And he didn't get camera from me. But this story I tell the later how I managed psychologically to put him down, because he tried to put down me. Anyway, I'm continuing now, coming back from Vladivostok, my first trip. So I arrived to Blagoveshchensk, and the Blagoveshchensk had to come off. I don't remember if I was thrown off or I decided to see once again the city where my mother was born. Actually, my mother never lived there. She was born there, but wartime and after war, she moved with their parents to Chechnya. But she wasn't Chechen. She was Russia. So I never been to Blagoveshchensk before. I told I traveled to Russia and visited the mother of my mother and in her house, but it was in Grozny, Chechnya. I went like every second year traveling there for months or sometimes even 2 during the summer, during my school vacation. I think probably 2-3 weeks, because my mother was then off from her job, not longer. But yes, I wasn't in Blagoveshchensk with my mom, never. So I wanted to see the city better, just where she was born. It was a beautiful city. And I went to police station, or militia. I'm always saying police because now it's Russian police already, but back then it was called militia. So I went to militia station and asked them that could they provide me any document that I have lost my passport, that I want to get back home. That this document would be easier to get on passenger trains, that wouldn't be thrown out all the time, or wouldn't have to have such big trouble on getting on there. And the guy told me that yeah, we can give me document, and when I fill up the form that how it happened and make like complaint. And I did, and he gave me a document, but they just not sure that these documents will help me, because this is not the issue of the trains. So and it didn't help. But anyway, they were nice. They gave me a document, and I had just written document with stamp of militia that I lost my money, and I don't remember, maybe even passport I wrote there. So I tried with this document to get on passenger train again, and I just got few stops on, let's say, few stops in Russia means that many hours, like usually even a day, because the train from Vladivostok to Moscow goes, I think, 2 weeks or 1 week and a half. So if I say only few stops, I was able to travel till I was caught by control. It means I traveled sometimes for days, a day or 2 before I was thrown out. And I succeeded to get to Siberia on passenger trains. I didn't have much trouble there. And then I decided to look around in Baikal as well, close to the lake. And it was beautiful, very beautiful. I was even thinking, if not only the Russian drinking culture, where many alcoholics were walking around, I would have moved to live there, next to Lake Baikal. It was so beautiful. And the Sopkas means hills which are covered with forests. These places are just so beautiful that I felt their home, even without never being living there before. It was just coming back home. But I decided then that maybe sometime in the future I still had a lot to see, and that was my decision not to stay there. I stayed just half a day, and I continued my trip back to home. So I continued on passenger trains because I was so homesick still, and I did some places, I did little bit of hitchhiking as well, but mostly in 2 weeks I got back home. So in the whole trip was one way 3 weeks, and back was 2 weeks. So I was altogether, with little stop in Vladivostok, I was 1.5 months. It was this almost 1.5 months. And there are stories to tell more, but as I'm a little bit confused myself already how exactly I traveled in which exact trip, so I'm telling right now the general overview of the locations where I were. Maybe later I will publish a map where I try to recall better all my trips. But the stories which happened with encountering criminals sometimes, I will probably tell apart on separate stories, because to get into details, to explain everything, it will be very long. How I managed to survive encounters with gangs, which I'll explain later. So that was my first trip to Far East. The second trip, I repeat, the first trip was before I went to the army. I did the first trip somewhere in the late 80s. Just before, just a year probably or two before going to. I'm wrong again. I did the same year before, because I was already 18. I went to army when I was 18. So yes, I had to do the same year. When I came back from my first trip, late 80s, very late 80s, and in 1990, I think it was, I was in Russian army, went to Russian army. Then second trip, I did in around 93, 92, I really don't remember these years exactly, but then I went again to Siberia. But this time I did like more curves, more rounds, not anymore on straight line going there. I tried to go again to China, through Manchuria. I told already that I tried several times to get to China. So my second trip, I went only to Manchuria, and I didn't go again to Far East. I came back to Baikal because I didn't succeed getting in with my new passport to China. And yes, now I start to recall the second trip in early 90s. I tried also twice to get China, but from other ways. So that was my I suspect that was my first trip to Chan actually, yes. I came to Baikal, and instead of going back to European part of Russia, I turned, after coming of course through Siberia, and it was a long trip, and in few words it sounds like it's fast, but it was pretty interesting and beautiful trip. And I will tell one place where I liked the most before going to Russian Asia, the Chanshan and Middle East. I stopped over in Krasnoyarsky Krai because somebody told that on the train, probably somebody told, when you arrive there, you have to see the Stolby. Stolby means, I don't even know. Anyway, the Stolby, it's called Krasnoyarsky Krai. These are stones, which are very huge stones, probably from Ice Age or something. And there are hundreds or tens, many tens of them are these. And they are, like, if you know, Siberian trees are pretty high. They are like 3-4 times higher than the trees, and they are like not like mountains. They are like stones, huge stones, and they are above the ground, very high. So they told me they are unique in your world. You have to go to see them. So I stopped over in Krasnoyarsk without just passing by. Went to visit in Siberia the Stolby, and I climbed on top. And that was probably my only time in my life when I scratched my name on top of one of stones. I never done before, never done later. It's not my style of putting my names anywhere. But it was very hard to climb on there. The people were just watching around who visited these places, and they told me you should not try to climb on them because they are stones. They are not mountains, stones. They are slippery. I had to find cracks to put my fingers to or whatever way I could get on top of there. And I got on top, and it was so beautiful view. You could see all the Siberia up to horizon, and then I scratched my name on one of these. It should be still there. You never know. One can, but you don't know my name, so I keep it secret for now. I don't remember if I did scratch my date of being there, but I did put my name on there, or initials. I don't even remember. It wasn't my thing to do that, but somehow I decided, okay, that was a success. I succeeded to climb on top, and I put my initials. I wasn't sure I'm able to get down. And I wanted to sit there, enjoy and meditate, but then I saw that storm is coming, rain is coming from afar. You can see that weather is turning bad, and I had to come back quickly before the stone will be all wet and windy there. So I came down. I succeeded to come down. The last maybe 10 meters I had to jump probably, because it was very steep, but it wasn't too high, so I took the chance. So then I started to go to Middle East, direction to Kazakhstan, and hitchhiking, and somewhere in Semipalatinsk region, I guess I also took a cargo train once, because there was so few cars on that area where I happened to be that I didn't have any option. I just saw the train was actually going further away, train tracks, maybe kilometer away. I saw a train, so I spent maybe half a day trying to hitchhike, and I wasted just my time. Then I walked till the cargo train, because I realized, and because of probably bad trucks, even on empty field, the train was moving slow enough, I could jump on. And I succeeded, I jumped on, and in some place I came down again, and I started to hitchhike again. and I met one local, like it was an empty field, nobody there, but still some locals, yurta I saw there. And I went to them because I was running out of food. And I went to them. I have to tell a little bit how did I get the food usually, because otherwise I forget later. How did I survive? Because I went without money, as I told them. Normally, in cities, I went to bakeries when early morning, where I've asked local people where our bakeries are, and I went to bakeries and asked them that whatever excuse I found at the moment, I've told them, could you give me some bread which is not good to sell, because in Russia time they didn't have very much automated the system, and some of bread was coming out not very nice looking, so they gave a lot of bread to me, all which was normally thrown away or given to animals. We didn't throw away, I think. So we gave a lot of full bags. I got normally like full bag of bread, like for a week to eat. So that was one way to do it. Another times when I couldn't find bakeries, or they were closed or were very far to go, then I went to markets and asked people just around that could you help me with a little bit with something. And sometimes they gave, and sometimes they said you have to work for it. You can't get free, and stand and sell now my products and shout, and they teach me that how to sell the bread. But my mother is Russia. I speak perfect Russia, so it was no problem. I sold their products, and after a couple of hours work, they said, okay, you earned your food, and they gave me the food. And sometimes when I had nothing at all anymore, couldn't... Sometimes I was actually for a couple of days without eating, only water, in Siberia, till the next village or somewhere. And also drivers, they gave me their food sometimes, but I didn't ask usually. I usually tried to keep my own food, because drivers' life is not easy as well, but usually we shared. The drivers are very nice. In Russia especially. Russia, who have survived after Second World War, usually people survived who were very helpful and very open-hearted. And some people, several places, I was sleeping in their homes. People invited to me home. Imagine that. You're a stranger. I don't know if these days it happens anymore. But even in Russia, because Russia has changed a lot since it was 30 years ago and 20 years ago, and I had during the 10 years I did trips. But that time still Russia was very warm, and they invited people who they saw. I'm traveler, and many places I was having a good night. Sleeping at somebody's home and taking shower and moving on, washing my clothes even and moving on. That's how. And they gave me food, and normally not money. I never asked money, so people helped me enough. I asked money on the street. It did happen. Just my first ever tries when I overcame my psychological I don't know how to say. Psychologically, I wasn't a person who would ask people money on the street, but during one of my trips, I had to do that. So I explained, just stopping people on the street and explaining my situation and saying I need just some money to eat something. And that was my first trial. But anyway, I survived that way, getting food. And in some villages, people were poor, but even the poor people, they gave me some bread, and I ate some bread for days because I had nothing else to eat then. And sometimes the bread was already getting bitter, and some not mushrooms, but some not very best conditions, but I scrubbed off the worst part and I ate the bread, and it felt tasty. If you are hungry, everything feels tasty. It was good, but I remember that it wasn't the perfect food what I would have eaten, but I did. And so continue on when I arrived from Siberia to Russian Middle East, and after jumping off some cargo train, I saw a local yurta. It's a little hut made from wooden frame and skins on top of it, like a konus style. And they had several yurtas and animals around, and I walked to the family there and said if I have some food, and they invited me in, and they gave me some food, and it was my first time when I actually had also a piece of horse meat. It's darker and the taste different, but it's good. It's still meat. And they gave me some dried milk. I don't remember how it's called, but it has specific name. So it's pressed and dried milk. It's not cheese, but it's kind of very, very salty thing. But it kept me alive for a while during my travel. So I got little pieces of that, and I don't remember something else, maybe bread. And then I moved to Changshan. That was my first arrival to Changshan. And I think it was after I came back, I was stopped by militia again, because the area in Kazakhstan, which is Changshan, where I passed by, was close to Chinese border. It was a border zone, so people wouldn't be allowed to live there or walk there without special permit, resident permit or whatever. So I got trouble while coming back. Yeah. So that when I went to first time to Changshan, I didn't get in trouble. I didn't know even that it was so close to Chinese border that wouldn't be allowed to be there. But I arrived to then Changshan and went. Let me think 1 second. But details actually are not important. Anyway, I went to train up to mountains, and I made some friends because I passed through some hotels which were already like private hotels. Somebody had up in mountains for richer people, and I stayed in one of the hotels for while. I'm now lying. It's not this trip even. So first trip to Changshan, I didn't go to a training. I went to travel, just to travel. I did train as well a little bit, but most of I traveled, so I didn't still make new friends there. I went through Kazakhstan, through the Tianshan, and I went to Kyrgyzstan, and I wanted to go even further to the south, but during that time there were wars going on, and they said that if you go to Kyrgyzstan, I have to check the map, I don't remember exactly the countries, but I think after Kyrgyzstan comes Turkmenistan, or I don't want to lie, but yeah, they said you better don't go there. It's too close to Afghanistan, and there are too many problems. And if you don't have proper documents or money, whatever, you can go either robbed or either shot by the fighting parties there. If you don't, if they suspect that you are one of spies. So I didn't go there, but I was still in Kyrgyzstan. Bishkek, I think, is the capital of Kyrgyzstan. I take all from memory right now. I haven't checked the map for years. Now, and when I went quite high mountain, there were still roads for big trucks going through this area, through Kyrgyzstan, after Kazakhstan, more to the south. And the road was going to China from that side. So I decided to try there to go China again. So as I said, this was my second trip after I came back from army already, and I didn't still have. It was still a Russian passport, but it was different passport. I think I had to change it. No, I'm lying. Again, it was not different passport. The laws have changed, and they're becoming more freedom of movement. And people, I thought somewhere that now people can easier go to China. That's why I tried again there. I didn't want to go illegally there. I just wanted to go till the border, because the cargo was shipped through there all the time and locals were going to China. So I was thinking maybe I slipped through showing my passport and they let me go. So I ride with one truck to the high mountains. I think altitude was something 3.5 kilometers already, very high. The roads were very high because it's mountainous area, and the passageway to China was on very high level over sea. And I told the guy, the driver, one who was going to China with his cargo, that I want to go to China, I have passport, etc. But he probably understood it's not so easy, but he told me, yes, he will let me, he will take me. And maybe 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers before the border, there was already control, like military guys stopped the car, checked the documents of a driver, and the driver responded to a question the border guy asked, that who is the another guy? Is he a driver, or who is that? And the guy joked with the border guard, I'm bringing a spy. And the guy laughed, the military guy, but still that don't joke with me, but didn't control my documents. So that's just Russia, And I now arrived to border, there weren't any issues. I just came off a truck and he left his way, and I went to control and explained I want to go to China and travel there, and they said me no, and I came back. That's it. So I hitchhiked again, and it took many days and maybe even a week. And one guy who I hitchhiked on, his small bus. It wasn't like big bus, I told the story before, but small, I don't remember the name, Niva. No, Niva is a small car. Anyway, just for 8 passenger, like microbus, He picked me up and, you're traveling, you are a guest of mine. You have to now drink with me. And it was still in high mountains on my way back from Chinese border, but I didn't arrive yet to Bishkek. So it was in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and there was one mountain river. He stopped over at the river, and he said, by the tradition, you have to empty the whole glass of vodka in one shot, non-stop. Or, by the tradition, you have to be thrown into a river. Who doesn't do that? So it was interesting experiments. And, I didn't get, I guess, too drunk, but it was fun feeling and nice to travel on. And then I arrived to Bishkek, and somewhere I met that trip, yes, that because I only went once to that border cordon. I met somewhere on the road another hitchhiker who was from England. That's one of the guys who I met as a foreigner there. And he said he got passage visa to go through whole Russia only for 3 days. From Kyrgyzstan to Petersburg. He had to go St. Petersburg, and there he wanted to go to continue to Finland. And he basically said like he doesn't know how to do that, and I said him it's impossible. We had very difficulty to talk because I didn't speak any English back then. I did study English in school, but all I remembered was just 2-3 words. I wasn't very good at languages. The languages I started to study later when I knew that I'm gonna leave a country, and I studied English on my own later to prepare myself. I studied just the grammar, but I wasn't still very good. I was that time not studying yet English. So we communicated mostly with hands and long ways to explain what we needed. But I succeeded to explain him that he will not be able to cross entire Russia even by train, only in 3 days. So he will miss his visa. So as I knew what he needed, I helped to translate him when we arrived to Bishkek. I went with him together with a consulate or some passport, some kind of organization we found out. I don't remember details, but I helped him to get a longer visa, maybe 1 week, in order to be able to arrive to Finnish border, to go through all the Russia to travel. And then he paid my ticket from Almaty. We arrived, I think, hitchhiking to Almaty. Actually, not. Now I know how I met him. I remember. I met him on one of the passenger trains. I was there, jumped on there without ticket, and I succeeded. But I think I met him like that, and then we became kind of friends, and we traveled on trains, on passenger trains, and I tried to get him a ticket like a local person, because I was Soviet citizen and he was foreigner. For foreigners, the ticket price was much higher. I don't remember, it was twice or 5 times or 10 times, I don't remember that, but it was much higher a ticket for train. And he wanted to save money, he wasn't rich, but I said, okay, let me buy ticket for you, for both of them, because there were no names on ticket, it was just, if I remember right. And I bought two tickets to Moscow from Kazakhstan, but during that trip, somewhere in the middle of our way back to Moscow, one of the controls asked his passport, and probably he saw by clothing or whatever that he's not local. And then he paid more for a ticket. He had to pay or bribe the guy, and I don't remember his details, but anyway, he had to pay more. And then we arrived to Moscow, and from Moscow we bought again like 2 local tickets, not as a foreigner tickets, to St. Petersburg. And there I advised him to play like he's sick. He lost his voice, and we passed by without being controlled. So only I showed the ticket for my ticket and his ticket, and he got cheap ticket from Moscow to St. Petersburg without any problems. We got off. He went to Finland. I went on to the north to the Kolan half island. I wanted to visit there. And that was all my second trip. So it was nice. I got pretty quickly, from just a week or a little over a week, I got back from Kazakhstan to St. Petersburg, to Moscow, and from there to St. Petersburg. And from there I went up hitchhiking, because I didn't have any money. So I didn't have any sponsor with me anymore, and I stopped quite several times during my trip to north. It was interesting, but all I remember, it was all like small bushes in this area to the north. Some areas where forests were completely dark black, that I also remember. And funny thing was, there was some little river, or not river, it's a tiny like, it's not river, it's a water source, let's say water source, and there was dripping water for cars who pass by just to collect, to take some water from there, and it was written mineral water on top of that. And that was funny because all the forest in this area was black from contamination. Local said, or driver probably said, that it's because of some mining. I don't remember which kind of metal they mined there, but because of bad technology of producing this metal, the fumes which came from factories, they killed all the trees. So only trunks of the trees for miles and miles and miles, like tens of square kilometers. It was just trunks of the trees, all black, completely black, and a mineral water source for healthy drinking. So there I went on hitchhiking. I passed this area, bad area, and there were again only low forests or low bushes, and when sometimes the trucks wanted to go turn away to a village or to a destination which wasn't on the main road, when I was left on the crossing somewhere. And same as in Siberian areas and Russia, Middle East, there are roads which just go side roads with tens and tens of kilometers, sometimes even hundreds of kilometers sideways, and you don't know when you see a next truck who picks you up. So I took pretty high risk not to be picked up again there in the middle of nowhere. And I remember a lot of mosquitoes there. It was called different. They're tiny. It's called in Russia mashkara. They are almost invisible, but they bite as bad as normal big mosquitoes. So it was full of mashkara. It was pretty tough to stand outside hitchhiking there, especially going to take some shit, you know. Your bottom was all full of mashkara immediately. It was you had to do it very fast. Prepare yourself and shoot it out, not to be all bitten. And then that's just things you remember because the tough moments, you know. And I did succeed to be picked up by another truck, and basically arrived to Murmansk in just a few days, I think. I don't remember, 3 or 4 days, something of trip with different trucks and different cars. And I looked around there a little bit. I crossed even there is a little bay. I crossed the bay with the barge, passenger barge, and it was very cheap, so I had enough just to get there and to get back, because the trip it's a local trip, very very short one, and because there was some monument for war heroes, or very famous one, and or castle, something like top of that, high on a hill, and I went there, visited, and then I started to hitchhike back to the European side, of Russia. And that was my second trip. And not to get maybe too boring with another story on the same issue or same type, I will tell immediately my next trips as well. So without much details. So next trips for, I think next trip I was already working. I was working in a bank as a security guard, but I still missed a lot about my travels. So I took me off from this job, and I told them I don't know how when I come back, how long trip it will be. First I took just a vacation, but I warned them that if I will be longer, I kind of let them know. I call from Russia. And I went hitchhiking. I arrived till Odessa. I had some encounters with criminals there, and it's a very criminal area, Odessa, famous in all Russia. And I will tell all the encounters in another podcast, how I managed to come out of difficult situations with gangs and criminals. But then from Odessa, I traveled also to, now I remember one more story. I was not going straight to the Tian Shan Mountains. That trip, I guess I did travel only up to Aral Sea area, and I don't remember why I decided to come back. I didn't feel right. So I wanted to go back to Tian Shan to train there this time. I already made some contacts. And that time I got off a train on Aral Sea, probably because of having no ticket, and I decided I'm not going to move forward because all the area there was really danger zone. There were like hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of road, maybe even 1,000 through how we call it, it's empty area. It's like how we call it in Africa, north, in desert. So in Russia as well, there are deserts, quite large one, and there they are called the Road of Death. So I didn't want to hitchhike and try train without money through this area. There are roads of death, they called, for hundreds and thousands of kilometers. Then I came back. I decided, I go to by another route maybe, or next time with money or whatever. So I came back to my country and continued to work. But it was 2-week trip, and I saw a little bit of beautiful Russia. And on one of trips, actually twice, it was once, I went to Chechnya, because I knew my grandmother was still living there. It was before the war started, right before the first Chechen war started. She was still living there, because later, when first war started, my mother went to pick up my grandmother and brought her to my country. And they sold the house. Somebody still bought her house. Because they didn't know that war will be very bad. It goes further. But then I hitchhiked through Chechnya, and I went to Baku. And maybe it tells a little bit about me, but I will tell you one interesting thing is, like, I was so much into traveling that I did visit, while I passed through Chechnya, Grozny, I did visit the house of my grandmother. And, I don't know if to feel shame about it, but I saw my grandmother there. I went to her house because I knew where he was living. I was every second year when I was child and younger, I was visiting with my mother at house, and I remembered all that area very well. And I took the right tram and arrived to the right place and right house, and all by memory. And I went to her house and waited there, maybe like 10-15 minutes, and I saw her coming out. She had little garden, but I didn't even say her hello. I thought, when I come back from my trip, because I was coming through the same road. I just watched her. She is alive, she is okay, she moved around there. Because I knew if I will be, maybe because I knew that if I will go there and she knows that I'm going to somewhere dangerous area, because there were many war zones, even in Baku and Armenia and Georgia, all these areas were all war zones. She wouldn't let me go there. So I didn't tell her, I just saw her, she's okay. And I watched her just a few minutes, and I turned back and continued my trip to Baku. And from Baku I wanted to move to Armenia to visit there, but then I talked to several people and also local policemen, militia men there, and they said better don't go because there have been just a big national issues between hundreds of people killed between each other, and you better don't go. There are martial law there, and the tanks are on the street, so you better don't go there. And then I didn't. I just stayed in Baku a couple of days. I liked the city so much, very beautiful city. It was even back then. Now we say it's more beautiful, it's built up, but back then with like all the buildings and very hilly. Baku is very, very hilly, very high hills are there. So roads are mountainous roads there. And I asked one person, could he find me a job? I had asked many people I could find a job. I actually had a teeth, one tooth was aching so much I couldn't even bear it anymore. So I asked the local dentist who would be affordable. And I went in Baku in some old area of town. When they advised me to go, there is an old dentist who is already on pension, and he will do it for very little money. And I entered this house, and I saw it was a wheel with the foot. He was moving around with like a sewing machine was the drill to drill the tooth. So I decided no, I'm not going to get treated by this dentist. Even though he could have been good, but so I didn't let him to treat my tooth. I just bared the pain until the pain subsided, luckily, in few days. And I asked people for a job around there, and one guy, you have to go out of a town, out of Baku, and take this bus to ask this person. And I went like with my last money. I took the bus ticket, and I went somewhere village in mountains and talk, and I discussed the conditions of job and conditions of pay, and I realized it's not very good pay for this job what I would have done there, and I didn't really want to so much to say in high mountains. Just I don't remember everything, but why I decided not to stay there. It was very beautiful anyway, but I probably decided no, I better travel on. And later on, maybe next time I come and find a job there, because it was just a very nice area. I would have liked to live there, like in Siberia and next to Baikal. And then I came back to Grozny. And in Grozny, I went visited my grandmother. Then I talked to her and just said where I was, and she thought I'm crazy probably, but she didn't say anything bad about it, and I didn't stay long there. I just said that how family is and how mother is, my mother, and that's it. I moved on, and after that year, I did little bit of crisscrossing of Russia, but mostly the same areas. It didn't become anymore so interesting, because Russia is almost the same everywhere now. I mean, in the sense that I've seen already so much that I didn't feel I need to go any different areas. I've been in Far East, I've been Siberia, I've been in Urals, I've been in south of Russia, the ex-Soviet countries in Russian Asia, and the north. So there weren't any more new to see me. I already saw everything what I wanted to see. Then next trips, I went to Tianshan just to train. So I still went without money. I didn't have any much money, but sometimes I bought already ticket then, because back in late 90s, 97, I already had business. I had money moving around, but not so much just to buy trips with planes or whatever, because I had family already. I had 2 children and I didn't have much spare money. But I had enough. Sometimes I bought some places tickets where were difficult to get on. And when I went to mountains to train to Tianshan, I was for a month sometimes. And as I had friends, I made friends who had a hotel there. I went there, visited there, stayed there for a couple of weeks even, did some little jobs there, and not for money, just for having one room for myself, as long as there are no reservations. And I took from the hotel my tent, leaving most of things behind, just a tent, and went to train myself higher in mountains for a couple of days sometimes. And I saw avalanches there, and it's very loud, and I meditated on peaks of some different, not very high mountains, but still about 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers maximum, maybe this area, weren't very high. The hotel was itself like 1.5 kilometers height location. And one thing I can tell as well, which might be interesting, I had a golden ring, which was built on my drawing. I paid to one goldsmith to make the ring with the logo of my private school of martial arts. So I already was teacher then, and I had my private school, and I did a golden ring, which I kept over time with me. But then happened that I was meditating on some place on high mountains, which was view over the crevasse. It was outcrop of a mountain which was above the river there. And I meditated there every day. It was not far from the hotel. And one day I went there and I felt like I don't want to go there. I don't know why. I felt something is wrong. Maybe it had moved a little bit. My subconscious picked up that it's falling already. But the point is that I didn't go. And the next morning I went to there, and the hill was gone. The outcrop was gone into a ravine down to a river. It wasn't very high, but I could have been injured very badly or even killed if the rest of stones comes back on you when you fall down there. Then yes, it's easy to get killed there. And then to thank my own intuition that I realized I didn't want to go there. I trusted my intuition. I took the ring, the golden ring, and I threw it into a ravine there down. I know the exact location where I threw, but by now, 30 years, maybe it's all gone with water. And sel in Russia means when mud coming from mountains. Maybe it's all gone, but maybe it's still there. I don't know. One day I can tell the location of a ring, which maybe someone can find. But yes, I threw it away, just as a thanks for mountains for warning me about this danger. And I actually went risking my life anyway up in mountains, and in one glacier there was river coming out, the same small river but high up. It was coming from glacier from inside. and I wanted to go into the cave of this glacier to see inside. It wasn't very high, I think like 3 meters high and 3 meters wide. And I went down on the side on the glacier, and I started to go into there, but I didn't have any special equipment. Very basic shoes and no climbing equipment, or how they call them even. I never used them. The special ropes and I don't know, nails or whatever they have under the boots. They have like all kind of equipment. I never trained with that. I trained only on my personal body capacities. Then only thing I had with me was kirka, like a hammer. It was important just on some snow patches to see, to push through to see if there is any stone below, if there is not any crevasse to fall through. That's why I used the kirka, and sometimes to knock on the stones to hear the sound, if they are loose or if they are stable enough. That was my only tool I had. And inside the glacier, I used that to make little grabbing point. So I knocked the kirka into the side of glacier, and I kept myself with how to put it, on the limit of equilibrium. So every little move would have dropped me let me loose from the glacier, and I would have dropped into a river. And one point I went about 10 meters or something like that into the glacier cave, but the cave, the river wasn't, it was very, very narrow. It was very narrow, and the round cave, it was like one side was still almost parallel. So I could step on it carefully, and I used also my pocket knife as another tool to catch me to the ice. And after 10 meters being inside the cave, the river turned a little bit. So the parallel side of a cave where I could step on was further away, like 2 meters maybe or something, but on the other side. So I was thinking to jump there, but when I realized it's too bad idea. It's on ice. But I still wanted to go on, so just as a check, I knocked out one little stone from a side of ice, and threw it into the river. It was moving quite slowly. It was narrow, maybe narrow, only 1 meter narrow, but the other side would be 2 meters away because it was further away. The curve of a river didn't allow to just step over it. And then I dropped the stone, and it made sound like bloomp. It was very deep sound. So I realized this river is moving slowly, not because there is not a little water, it's just very deep. And I decided, no, it's a bad idea to move forward. It's too big a risk. And when I got back out of the glacier cave, I thought about it, that I was pretty much risking my life at the moment. Any moment when I would have slipped, I would have been swept away with this very deep river at that point. And the river actually went again under the glacier, another point. So it wasn't the same river which all the water came through a ravine, which I told you before. And that was one of the problems of the locals there. They said that they are scared of this area because there is so much water coming from glacier, but they don't know where this water is going to. So the water what arrived to the city later from this narrow ravine and narrow river, it wasn't entire water that was produced by the glacier. So we thought that there will be a big catastrophe soon on this area. And that was actually the reason why the capital of Almaty was later moved into, what was the name? It's renamed now to Nur Sultan, I think, the capital. But it was another name before that. So they moved the capital away from Almaty. It was capital of Kazakhstan, just because of this reason that they were expecting for decades that there should be a big catastrophe, where all the mountain should come down, because it's permeated with water which is not coming away from the mountain. It should be somewhere in the ground, and one day it would all slip and come down with mud. They have built very huge mud blocks in several places before the city, but anyway, they calculated it would not be enough, that hundreds of thousands probably people would die if finally the mountain comes down. But anyway, so I wanted to go up mountains. One year I went early in spring. I used to meditate that area usually on summers, but in 1997 I think I went there early in the spring, and in the springtime there was a lot of snow still up, and I wanted to visit the same glacier, same mountains, and it was all covered. It was all covered with snow, and I heard the river sound under the ice and snow, and I carefully crossed it, and I went up the hill where I usually meditated, but I didn't succeed to go very far, because at some point the snow just fell like I dropped probably half a meter. All my body dropped with the entire snowfield, and I was so lucky that the avalanche didn't come down. So basically the snow was light, and it was slightly accumulated, and because I was stepping there, I did very, very careful steps. I moved like a cat, one step at a time, and listening the sounds, and one by one point it still crashed under my weight, and the entire snow collapsed. It compressed. It was such a sound like how to comment, like an airplane, like a jet, but in two ways. It went from to the left and right. I heard like it went to the left and right, and I fell like 50 centimeters or something. I fell down with the entire mountain. So the snow compressed, but it didn't come down, and I was lucky to survive that event. So I came back very carefully into the same steps where I stepped before, and I didn't go up to meditate there. So I came back half a year later in summer again to meditate there. And that's it for these trips in shortly, and I'll continue with something else next time. I realized after listening the intro too that there were some errors. I tried to do both intros without any notes or watching any maps or whatever, to talk from memory as it comes. But as it's been everything over 20 and 30 years ago, because the Russia trips I did during 10 years, then I realized I do have to do some research to refresh my memory, because I haven't been talking about these stories in detail to anyone. Why? Because my life been busy, and this was just the beginning of my big travel. I never thought that Soviet will collapse and the border will open and I will be able to freely go around the world. I did a round the world trip in well over 30 countries, and I lived in several countries for a longer time and worked there. So there was no time just to reflect about my past travels. I always thought about my future travels and being busy with surviving after escaping my country, ex-Soviet country. So let some errors be in, which I had in the intro 1 and intro 2, but some probably important notes have to make. And now I already wrote down, after listening the second intro, that, for example, I told that from Kazakhstan I traveled to to Kyrgyzstan, and from Kyrgyzstan all further wanted to go to Turkmenistan. Actually, it wasn't. I checked the map, it was Tajikistan. It just sounds a little bit similar. I haven't been neither in Turkmenistan or Tajikistan. I've been very close to these borders, so that's why I didn't remember exactly. So from Kyrgyzstan I traveled to Chinese border. From there on I wanted to travel to Tajikistan, but I was advised not to go there because of situation, a lot of internal national conflicts. And as a area like Grozny, where I visited later, I wanted to I went to Baku in, now I have a map in front of me, to Azerbaijan, and I wanted to go through Armenia and Georgia, and I was strongly advised not to do that because this time there were mass killings between different nationals who lived in their country. Like in Armenia we killed, if I remember right, Georgians, or we killed other nationals like Azerbaijan nationals who lived in Armenia, and I was told that people were killed by dragging them behind the cars alive, pulling through hair, and that was so bad, the situation, the mass killings, that tanks were on the streets. So yes, I wanted to go to see with my own eyes if it's true or it's just propaganda, but I was strongly advised not to do that, and then I didn't. And I went back to Grozny in Chechnya to visit my grandmother and so on. I told already this story. So next correction, which I looked about, when I crossed the border to Manchuria, I checked the map, and there was even antique Manchuria, and modern Manchuria is not the area actually where I tried to cross to Mongolia. And I always, all the 30 years, I remember that this area is called Manchuria because local people told me, "Oh, you've been to Manchuria," when I told them where I'm going, and you wanna go through Manchuria. So I remembered that's Manchuria, but that's not correct. It's straight to the south from Lake Baikal, on the border of Mongolia, where I tried to cross it once, first trip, and once during the second trip. And later I recalled I tried even third time during the second trip, close to that area, just a few hundred kilometers or maybe 1,000 kilometers to the west side from that area, also on border Mongolia. I didn't recall immediately because I didn't went till the border. I was advised that it's not a good idea and you will get into trouble. So before arriving to the border, I just turned back, and I didn't do that attempt. That's why I didn't remember. But when I looked at the map and everything, I started to recall that intention as well. So the next correction is about the train wheels changing. I haven't seen it myself, I was told to people when I asked locals that how come the trains come from China straight to Russia when the tracks are different sizes. I was told that they are changing their wheels, but it didn't happen on the Russia border. I checked on internet and the wheels are already changed on Mongolian border. So supposedly Mongolia has same size tracks with Russia standard. So the wheels of trains are changed when train enters from China to Mongolia and also from China to Kazakhstan. But this, if I remember right, is now the new train line. It didn't exist before, like 20, 30 years ago. So, next correction about mistakes. I told that I coming back to home to the north, but ex-Soviet country. It was just slip of word. North there is no special ex-Soviet countries. I was meaning to go back to the west, but as I was then traveling in the south and Russian Asia, then in my sense was first I had to go to the north, but then to the west. So that's why I said to the north, but I should have said that northwest of Russia. These kind of mistakes do happen and will happen in the future, but I will try to avoid them. So after traveling well over 30 countries, you can imagine the memory starts to a little bit fade on certain details and make mistakes while thinking on what to say. And thinking back, I had one pocket book, very small, like 10 centimeters or 15 centimeters, maybe a little bit bigger, maybe 20 centimeters. No, it was very small. It entered my pocket the book of world geography, and it was printed in ex-Soviet Union. And as you imagine, with all the secrecy in Soviet Union, not all the cities were correctly located, especially the military zone cities. Later I learned that the cities are actually displaced on the maps quite a bit back when it was printed. I traveled already like in times of more freedom, but in Soviet times the geography books were on purpose modified that spies wouldn't go to a right location. It was kind of stupidity because spies wouldn't be using these pocket books printed in Russia, but that was even such paranoia in Soviet times. There were not very clear or detailed roads anyway, so I just general location or directions I took by the cities when I hitchhiked, and I told which city I want to go. So that may also be the reason of my error about Manchuria. Maybe it was wrongly written. I don't have this book anymore. But this book I used also during my first attempt to go abroad illegally when I was 16 years old or 17 years old, something like that, before having passport, before going to Russia. And as I'm onto it, I will tell this little attempt as well, how it happened. So I went to capital in my country, capital city, and I knew where is port. Fence port is for foreigner ships. So under the night cover, I jumped both fences. There were double fences. Between the fences were area like 5 meters wide for dogs. It was all illuminated with projectors, with lights, but I took a risk and I crossed both fences without making any holes in that, and I run onto the, or I walked, fast walk. I didn't want to run, it would have been clearly bringing attention. I walked fast to the high tower where crops from fields were in for distributing to special ships, cargo ships, for poor countries in Africa from that port. And I climbed the ladder to the top to find any entrance, and I found the door, and it was unlocked. So I entered to that door, and it was a watching post inside. It was illuminated, light was in, but from top I could see the grain inside there. And I had to jump probably 5 meters down to some kind of platform. I knew I can't get back on, but I saw that there is conveyor going from that area through platform below. So I did take a risk and jumped onto that platform below. And from that platform I went to onto the conveyor. So it was very, very long conveyor from the storage area to a shipyard, to a pier of a shipyard. And I lied down on the conveyor. It wasn't working. It was running, but it wasn't working. It wasn't carrying grain at that moment. There were no workers. At least I didn't see anyone. Of course, I watched around. But just in case, I lied down on the conveyor belt. And I traveled on that maybe 20, 50 meters. I don't remember. Quite a bit. I traveled to a kind of machine which dropped to another conveyor the grain, and stupid as I was, I went into that dropping. I kind of was mechanically well aware, and I realized that shouldn't be any mechanical wheels inside, that it's just a grain delivering conveyor, and I shouldn't get into trouble, but I still took risk. I entered into the machine with the conveyor, or maybe not, I don't remember, but I remember I did something very stupid there, and later I thought that fuck, I could have been in trouble if mechanics was different. I think I went through the machine. I don't remember it really. It's like some memories are kind of suppressed in my mind, and or I peeked inside quickly because there was kind of ribbons were hanging before entering, and I quickly peeked that okay, there is no problem, and I don't have to jump off. So I think I went through that machine. And anyway, I dropped onto a little bit onto another conveyor belt, and that's how I remember that. And the another conveyor belt brought me right to a pier. Another machine was pumping grain, but there it was just working on empty run at that moment. And then I came off. I didn't enter into the second machine. It was obvious that there were some kind of pumps or conveyors, difficult ones, which would have crushed me because this conveyor pumped the grain or carried the grain up high on the crane. And this crane was hanging above the ship. The ship was probably already full of grain. The job was finished and the ship was ready to go, because the pipe which was hanging above the ship was very high. It was like 20-30 meters above the ship. It wasn't touching the ship. So anyway, I climbed the crane, and very slowly, it was under lights of projectors, it was all illuminated. but I carefully, little by little, very slow movements, went on top of a crane till the pipe. And I was thinking, I had little rope, but the rope I measured, it was too short. I think I had only maybe 10 or 15 meters of rope with me, and it wouldn't be still enough to jump onto a ship. So I waited there. I just lied down right on top of a pipe on the far end of a crane, and just was waiting and lying there thinking that maybe later on the works will continue and the pipe will be put on place, or was just thinking what to do next and how to get onto there or take the risk to jump. And I also saw the guards walking with guns on the shipyard. And at that one moment, I just heard order in Russian, "Вставай," stand up. And the guy was right on top of me. I was on last end of a crane, but already a little bit lower. There was some mechanical piece platform. I lied on that platform, and the guy was right on top of me, like a few meters on top of me on the crane, and pointing gun at me. And for his credit, he came so silently that I didn't hear the soldier. So I was surprised, and I realized, okay, I'm caught. So he brought me down from there and called police and the militia that time, called the militia guys, and we waited in some room there till militia arrived. And militia was drunk. He came alone. He was some middle rank militia man, and he realized that I explained that I just want to go to travel to foreign country, and of course he called to my city, to militia, who I am and if I'm any criminal, and he didn't find anything criminal about me. So he let me go, but the story wasn't that wasn't it, because he handcuffed me when he drove me to militia station, because he said, "I see that you are a boy, but you are just naive and stupid." And militia was quite nice in Soviet times. So he excused that, "Sorry, I have to put you handcuffs because I'm a little drunk and I don't know you really." And regardless that I'm a minor, he put me on his Soviet type jeep. And when we arrived to station, he couldn't find keys to handcuffs. So he showed me with a paperclip. He bent it a little bit, and he opened the handcuffs with paperclip. And I later used that technique in several occasions when I was in many years later in Canada in prison. I opened a couple of times just as a show off. But I will tell the story later. So in that case, just he showed me how to open the handcuffs with a simple paperclip, and he let me go basically after phone calls that it's all okay. And I also said I knew a little bit, of course, the Russian culture, and said that you shouldn't be angry on me because everybody of you gets vacation now, including the soldier who caught a spy, so to say. So they all get premiums and vacations home for a while because of success of their mission. And that's it. I think I used the same map then, the pocket map. That's why I realized the ship name was Monrovia. I probably checked in the back of book in the list of cities or countries that what is it, and that this is African ship. But I'm not sure. I think I did that. Its memory is fading now already. And that's why I knew that, okay, this is African ship, I want to go to Africa. And I didn't succeed, and maybe in a later podcast I tell more similar stories. I did quite a lot of attempts which weren't successful. Very few were successful, and this practice of trying to go through borders illegally were helpful later in my life, when I really needed that, when I had to escape my country, etc. So it was a good practice for my life, which I didn't know in advance, but it turned out to be very helpful. So that's it, a little addition with corrections, and I will continue next time.